A 54-year-old woman was single, at ease with life, and deservedly retired after devoting most of her time working as a high school teacher. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood in the city of Minneapolis, and her routine was almost always the same, until one day she heard a knock on her door that completely changed her life. Happiness should be Alice's nickname. Everyone in the neighborhood and her best friends knew her for her easy smile, her incredible life stories, sense of humor, and the main personality trait she claimed to have, the unique talent for making her special apple pie, which she made sure to always remember that it was her mother's recipe. Her days were summed up in waking up early, making a nutritious breakfast, sunbathing in the square, and sometimes going to the movies or meeting with friends, in addition to making apple pie at least once a month and taking it to her closest neighbors. It was on one of these cake-making days that Alice's morning was interrupted by an unusual visitor. The woman had just taken the pie out of the oven and was finishing washing up the breakfast dishes when she heard a knock on the door. Promptly, Alice dried her hands and went to see who it was. When she opened the door, she saw a teenage boy. He was sweating, wearing grimy clothes, and had a bike that he left on the street. "Hello," the woman said with a welcoming smile. Earlier that day, before deciding to knock on Alice's door, Will had woken up as usual to deliver newspapers to as many neighborhoods as possible. He had just turned 17, and his biggest dream was to go to medical school, to help and save the lives of people in need. Being from a simple family, he needed to help his father with the expenses to be able to study, mainly because his father always supported him since he told him and his mother about his dream. His parents' eyes filled with tears when Will said, "Mom, Dad, I want to be a doctor. I feel from the bottom of my heart that's what I need to do. This is how I want to help people." His parents said that they would need to save money, but that they would do everything to make their son's dream come true. However, a few years ago, Will's mother ended up contracting a sudden lung infection that surprised the family, and unfortunately, she could not resist. Will stayed by her side until her last moments, and he promised that he would become the best doctor in town one day. After his mother's death, Will began to divide his time between school and work as a newspaper delivery boy to help his father with some expenses and pay his studies. The boy rode miles and miles on his bike to deliver as many newspapers as he could, and that morning, when he decided to knock on Alice's door, he had left the house without having breakfast, as he had woken up late. Will had just delivered the last newspaper for the day, but he was far from his neighborhood and felt very hungry. His plan was to knock on some door, ask for a meal, and go. However, as soon as Alice opened the door with a beautiful smile, Will felt embarrassed. "Hello," she said. Instead of asking for something to eat, the boy only dared to ask for a glass of water. "Good morning, ma'am. Is it possible for you to bring me a glass of water? I was delivering papers around the neighborhood. I'm kind of tired," said Will. Alice took a good look at the young man and understood that he was probably hungry. So she invited him and brought him a generous piece of her delicious apple pie. They introduced themselves, and the boy entered shyly, accepting Alice's gesture, who seemed happier than he was, and he was eating the most delicious pie he had ever tasted. When he finished, Will looked at Alice. "That was the best pie I've ever eaten in my life. How much do I owe you?" "You don't owe me anything, dear. This pie was my mother's recipe, and she taught me not to accept payment for acts of kindness," the woman replied. "Well, then I thank you from the bottom of my heart," Will said, moved by that unusual encounter that inspired him to keep fighting to follow his purpose. Many years passed, and Alice was 74 years old when she was rushed to the hospital after feeling sick while shopping at the supermarket. She was taken to the nearest hospital. Her condition was serious, and she was very weak. After a week of hospitalization, no doctor could find out what was happening to Alice, so her friends and family decided to transfer her to the main hospital in the city that had the best professionals. When she arrived at the hospital, they called Dr. William Stewart for consultation. As soon as Dr. William entered the emergency room and looked at Alice, he remembered who she was, and she, who was already very weak, looked at him without being able to believe her eyes. Dr. William was the poor boy she had helped many years ago, and at that moment, he promised that he would do anything to find out what was happening and help Alice to recover. It took a few days to carry out a battery of tests and find out exactly what was affecting the elderly woman's health. Unlike other professionals, William did not give diagnosis without being absolutely sure about the case. And after a specific exam called the HCV antibody test, they finally discovered that Alice had severe hepatitis C, which was harming the functioning of her liver and all her health. Fortunately, hepatitis C was a treatable disease. However, it would take a series of medications to perform the treatment. Without thinking twice, Dr. William provided everything Alice needed, and because of her advanced age, he preferred to keep Alice hospitalized until her health improved. It was an uphill battle, but after some time, the elderly woman managed to heal completely, and Dr. William was the one who told her the good news. "It's over, Alice. You're cured, and you'll be able to go home in a few hours," he said excitedly, holding her hand. "Thank you, dear. I don't know what to say. You saved my life," Alice said, feeling genuine gratitude. However, she was worried about the amount she would have to pay for the whole treatment, as she knew that her savings as a retired teacher would not be enough to pay for the exams and medication. Then, Will handed the bill to Alice and said goodbye quickly with a hug, because a patient needed his help in another ward. When she looked at the amount to pay on the bill, Alice thought it would probably take the rest of her life to pay it all off. But then, she saw something written on the side of the bill. The words were, "Paid in full with a piece of apple pie." Then she understood. Alice's eyes had tears streaming down her cheeks. The elderly woman was taken by a great emotion because of Will's gesture, and he ended up becoming one of her best friends. She felt like he was the son she never had. After that day, Alice lived a few more happy years, making a point of taking a piece of apple pie to William in the hospital whenever she could, until the last years of her life. If you know any similar stories, write about it in the comments, like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more fantastic stories.